Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Hi.
Emily, hey.
Good morning.
How's it going?
It's going well.
Good. Welcome to the Ethics Experts. Been excited to have you on the show here.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
So let's just dive in. I always love to start with this question. What were you like growing up? What kind of kid were you? And how did that lead you into ethics and compliance?
Well, I'm laughing because ethics and compliance was definitely not a career I knew existed. And I wonder if, is that a career that kids these days, I think so. I think kids these days, it's a career that's established now. But when I was growing up in the 90s, that was definitely not a thing. So it was not on my radar. But what kind of kid was I? I grew up in a little beach town on the coast of Florida. So I had a very kind of carefree and free 90s childhood, the stereotypical come home for dinner when the streetlights turn on kind of thing. A lot of bike riding. I was very bookish. So I read a lot. But I had a wonderful childhood. It was, I think, really characterized by a lot of trust that was placed in me by my parents, which I think is also a reflection of place and time. Speaking as a parent now and thinking about the things that my parents let me do that I would not let my kids do now. I think about that sometimes, how did that freedom that I had as a kid shape who I am today? And I've got to believe that it shaped me in some way, even if I can't quite articulate.
Yeah. And what are going to be the, implications for the next generation that they weren't, that they couldn't stay out till the streetlights came on? Absolutely.
And when there's that extension of trust, you have this trust and, there's the responsibility to uphold it as well.
Right.
So what does that mean for kids these days that maybe don't have quite the same extension of trust? And I don't think it's because we don't trust our kids, but it's more, concerns around the broader world. But yeah, how will that shape them? How did that shape me?
Yeah. And what is the sort of ensuing view of the world that you have? You know what I mean? You, in our pre-show, you talked a little bit about your dad was a journalist. He was focused on a lot of these human interest stories. Growing up around that, how did that shape you and what impact did that have on you, with respect to your curiosity and your sort of human first kind of inclination?
Yeah. I'm really proud of my dad. I really admire him. He just retired earlier I guess it's been a year. He's been retired for a year now, as a lifelong career as a journalist, for a local newspaper. And storytelling and people were just part of the daily conversation. He saw stories in kind of any type of interaction or overheard chatter. And that was kind of his mind, where he would say, oh, I think there's something there. And he would follow up on that. So that was my model. He would instruct me in the art of the lead and, how do you frame a story to, get people's initial interest, and then you back up and kind of lay the foundation, and then you go deeper into the story and explain, and then there's a conclusion. That was an explicit part of my childhood, and he took me along on a lot of his if he had to go interview people, he would bring me sometimes if it was the weekend or after school or something like that. So I also got to see him in action, and it's really only decades later, as I reflect on, who am I and why am I the way that I am? And, going to therapy and asking those kind of questions, that I realize how much of an impact that had, even though I didn't clock it at the time.
Yeah. You're just absorbing it, and it's just sort of kind of forming into your DNA or something. And then, you can look back and say, oh, wow, I can sort of trace this back to this root,
Yeah, absolutely.
So what was next? So you grew up in this small town or in this beach town, and then you went on to college. What did you decide to study?
I majored in anthropology, and that was also something that I'd never heard of. I remember going to the the summer before you start your freshman year kind of orientation. Here's where the dorms are, kind of thing, and getting a brochure of the different majors. And at my university, you didn't have to declare a major until, I don't know, like your junior year or something like that. So there wasn't a pressure to pick. But I was looking through the brochure and I saw anthropology, and it was described as the study of people. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. I actually thought that I was going to major in English, again, following my dad's footsteps. But I saw anthropology and I thought, the study of people, I wonder what that's about. And so I just declared right then and there. And I'm grateful for it. It was the right call. And again, I think going back to that trust, explore what you want to explore. There wasn't a question of, well, what kind of job do people that study anthropology get? I think it's actually served me really well in my career, because I focused on what's called applied anthropology, which is essentially people that are alive today, modern history, as opposed to archaeology or kind of that historical record. And so again, kind of that thread, that curiosity around people and stories, I learned frameworks for thinking about that through my anthropology degree, and I learned a lot about how our environment influences who we are. I loved linguistic anthropology, how the words that enter our lexicon are a map of how cultures have interacted with each other, whether that was through warfare or through trade or whatever it is. So yeah, I think it ended up serving me well, even though it was really like a shot in the dark. I really had no idea what I was doing when I declared that major, but it was really fun.
So what made you pick that applied anthropology? Did that just seem more relevant? It seemed more interesting because it was more recent or something like that, as opposed to sort of digging through the dirt to try to find, artifacts or something?
Yeah, I had to take courses in all different domains of anthropology as part of my the first few years.
Yeah.
And they archaeology is interesting. The study of early hominids and evolution, that's really interesting. But I just never really saw myself as a field work type person. And I just found myself kind of in the applied anthropology courses, like in linguistic anthropology or others. I found myself able to make connections to things that I was experiencing or had observed, or that helped to explain dynamics that I kind of saw in the world around me. So it seemed more relevant, and it also felt like something that I could do something with that.
And, I don't know anything about anthropology, but what are some of those frameworks that you learned, or some of those kind of foundational elements that came from that field of study that kind of influence how you think about and how you interact and how you sort of, how you kind of approach organizational culture today?
I think the one of the strongest that has been an animating influence in my career has been the concept that we are shaped by our environment. We are products of our environment. Just thinking about how do we, as humans, we naturally want to sort and categorize. We want to sort and categorize things, people, ideas, whatever it is, and just as an example, what is a snail? Is that a bug? Or it's not a bug because it doesn't have legs, but it's sort of.
Yeah. What is that?
Yeah. Well, that's kind of how you and I think about it. But to the French, it's an appetizer. That is, our different categorization is shaped by our cultures and the environments in which we live and operate in. And so translating that to an organizational context, what kind of environment what kind of container are we creating for our people, and how is that influencing the way that they behave? I became really fascinated by behavioral economics and nudge theory, and that the idea of like choice architecture, and how we frame ideas, or the tools that we give people, very much influencing then how they will behave. I just think it's really fascinating, and that, again, with that hindsight of sitting here today and looking back, I would say that is probably the strongest through line in everything that I've done, and still very much a part of how I approach the work that I do today.
Yeah, like a liquid is defined by a substance that sort of takes the shape of its container, and we're sort of that way.
Yeah.
The container we're in, the culture we're in, the organization we're in has a direct impact on the shape of us as, us being water, and there's a lot of opportunity, and there's also a lot of, there's a lot of opportunity in that if there's intentionality around the shape of that container, and the taxonomy of sort of categories that are sort of imposed on those groups. But then there's also a lot of, I don't know, whatever the opposite of opportunity is. There's a threat, I guess, to the extent that those things are overlooked or they're paid short shrift, because there can be a lot of unintended consequences in terms of like how that container ends up influencing everybody, kind of to your point. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's a great metaphor.
So let's talk about like how you ended up entering into the ethics and compliance phase. How did you enter this space? You're studying anthropology. Fast forward, you're at where you're at now. Did it feel like a natural home because it was more of kind of like an application of a lot of the things that we're talking about, or like when did that connection really become really clear for you that, okay, wow, this is kind of a hand in glove type of a scenario?
Yeah, I had a similar in the way that I saw anthropology in that brochure and thought, like, wow, that sounds really interesting. I had a similar moment with ethics and compliance. And I was, after I graduated from college, I worked for a while in the nonprofit environmental sustainability space. And then I went on to get a master's degree in environmental science and policy. And I kind of thought that was going to be my path. After grad school, I worked for a few years as well, kind of in that landscape, also in academia, and then with government and with international climate change frameworks. And I thought that was going to be my path. And then a chance book tour, I was seeing the CEO of the Nature Conservancy speak. He had written a book, and this was in the early 2010s, and there was a wave of like the major nonprofits at the time had a lot of people coming from business, like from Wall Street, to kind of apply the principles of business to nonprofit. And so the CEO of the at the time, CEO of the Nature Conservancy wrote a book about it, about his experience, and I was kind of interested in that. And so I went, and that was actually how I got introduced to ethics and compliance. The book talk was hosted by LRN, and in the introduction, they talked about like ethics and compliance as being an operationalizing values and ethics into how businesses operate. And I had never thought about that before. And I thought, that's really interesting. I've worked in academia. I've worked in nonprofit. I've worked with government. And in kind of each domain, I felt like the pace of change was slow, or there was a lack of resources, or there was natural geographic, national constraints around influence. But business transcends borders. Business has resource. Business can influence policy, and so I came to ethics and compliance actually from a very kind of like wanting to influence the world in a positive way. Like that was my, like, it's sort of a very like a mission driven perspective. That's like what pulled me to it, because I saw the potential of, working with organizations that were trying to align the way that they were operating and doing business in the world with values, with ethics. That can help the environment, but that can also help so many other things that I care about, like human rights and equality. And so I truly, it seems sort of, I don't know, naive in a way. But I've got to say that still is like why I get up and do this work every day. And I do see that. But that's how I came to ethics and compliance. And I started out working primarily on organizational culture. So very much pulling from my anthropology background. And so I was working with organizations to understand, measure their ethical culture, work with leaders around kind of what are our values and how do we translate them into behaviors. I did a lot of work with employee groups at different levels, visited, factories around the world, talking to people, understanding their experience and kind of translating that, bringing that up in a data-driven way to say, like, this is whether it's reality or it's perception, like the outcome is the same.
Yeah, it is reality. Even if it's just perception, it is reality because the behaviors correspond to the perception, irrespective of whether it's real or not, Absolutely.
So that was kind of how I got started. And 13 years later, here I am.
So, I mean, you said that, it's kind of naive. I don't know. I think it's kind of romantic. Your path into it is very romantic. It was like applied curiosity, not just, oh, that's an interesting thing, but you really kind of like moved the rudder of your ship and pursued something that is, I don't know. I just think it's romantic. I think this whole thing that we're in is very romantic. It's about making the world better. It's about making our organizations better by changing the experience of the individuals within our organizations. And there's all these positive externalities that obviously fit in business because they drive more enterprise value. And that's what, businesses kind of live on returns and, the cash that investors end up getting. But the production of those things that investors care about are a function of, to your point, the experiences that people have at the end of the day and the application of values that aren't just words on the wall, but are actually animating and actually influence how people show up every single day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate that you in talking about the positive externalities, but then also connecting it to the value that it brings to business. I just was reading the other day that like 90% of businesses' value these days is locked up in intangible assets.
Yeah, goodwill and stuff like that. Yeah.
And now it's our IP, it's people, and so I just that shift is so interesting. And when so much of our value is intangible, and it's really connected to the power of our ideas, the power of our data, the power of our people, the power of our reputation, of our brand, of customer trust, social trust. I think the ROI of ethics it's like even more magnified.
It's bigger now than ever.
Value.
I mean, it kind of makes sense though to some degree, right? Because like the value of an organization is essentially the value that you can attribute to all the assets in the company, right? Like all the tangible assets. And then any gap between that sum and what the company sells for is ultimately kind of boils down to like goodwill. Well, that's the sinew, that's the sort of mortar in the wall. That's the application of, that's the kind of magic, I guess, that comes from the synergy within an organization and the extra effort that people put forward in the brand that's built and all those things that you can't put like a direct dollar on. And I think as we've moved from this manufacturing based economy to one that is more sort of people based, at least until the AI takes over, it kind of makes sense. It that's not that surprising. at some level. But what is surprising is the lack of, connection that, quote unquote, people at the top or investors have between the enterprise value of an organization and the extent to which that's influenced by the people that are doing work inside that organization. Like that is still kind of like the last mile of this sort of transformation that I think we're finally starting to, at least as an industry, we're finally starting to feel more confident to talk about. And we're finally starting to feel more confident to pull that value into our budget requests and things like that. Yeah. Because all those light bulbs on at the top are not sort of flickering on, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think you're right. I like that is the last mile. But I'm heartened. I think that more and more light bulbs are flickering on.
Yeah. And, by the time it's people like me and you who sort of see the world accurately, are running companies, then maybe all those light bulbs will be on at the top. But rather than like sitting back and waiting, I think it creates an opportunity for us to help those people see, those people at the top whose light bulbs are not on. It's an opportunity for us to kind of like pull that future forward if we can frame it right. If we can frame the stuff that we're talking about in the right way, in a compelling or a persuasive way. Because, I've been in this industry for like a decade now, and it's been the same freaking refrain the entire time. We're the office of no, we don't have the resources we need. It's hard to get my budget requests. I'm viewed as the anti-business department. All these freaking stereotypes that you've heard 1,000 times. The rate of me hearing those has not sort of dropped as precipitously as I would have expected, given my view of the value that like we provide. You know what I mean? It's kind of puzzling.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you on that. I feel like there was I feel like I've seen these jumps. And one way that I like to track kind of the evolution of our space is in people's titles, from chief compliance officer to compliance and ethics officer to ethics and compliance officer. And now we have like chief integrity officer, chief ethics officer. I think that's really interesting. And I think that's a signal of like what we think is important. Like even the flip between like compliance and ethics to ethics and compliance, it's like, which one is more important? So that's just like my personal like chart.
It's it's kind of a barometer, or it's some data that you can see sort of at a kind of a macro level of like the shift happening. And it's really at some level, it's, kind of back to what you were saying before, we're kind of a function of this environment, or we're a function of these containers. Labels are kind of containers at some level, right? And it's kind of a reframe of, adding this extra dimensionality to it, adding the ethics piece to it, and then putting that first and shifting into integrity. It's not like the sort of main pillars of compliance are then out the window. It's rather sort of an extension of it, or it's again adding some more dimensionality to it to make it more animating in the company, perhaps. But that's an interesting kind of trend, you're talking about. Yeah,
and I think like as like the world only gets more complex. I don't know what there's like the rates of change, like technological advancement and whatever. I don't know what that rate of change is for like the complexity of our world. Like we always just say like it's never been more complex. It's never been more critical. Like
change is coming faster than ever.
We're saying the same thing. Like we've been saying that for forever. But I think that's an opportunity for the ethics and compliance professional and for the industry to help our companies, help our leaders navigate that complexity in a way that protects those intangible assets and preserves the goodwill and the trust and the reputation and the resiliency of our organizations. And it's I think there's some reframing and retraining that those of us in the ethics and compliance industry, like we need to do on ourselves, like having that flip from ethics and compliance, like what are we here for? Like, are we here to drive compliance, or are we here to, help the business be as successful as it can in a way that's aligned with our values or the commitments we make to our stakeholders? And that's a shift in skill set. Like
it is a shift in skill set,
like
100%.
The ethics compliance professional of today versus 10 years ago needs different skills. It's an opportunity, but I think there's some work we need to do internally as well to take advantage of that opportunity.
That's a great point. There's new muscles to build. These aren't like, it's not like we need to grow a new arm. We just have to grow some new muscles. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think that shift that you talked about, the, compliance officer from, 10, 20 years ago versus the compliance officer of tomorrow, it is a different, I think it's a different language. It's a different, it's a different lens. We have to kind of change the, we have to change the sort of magnification. I don't know what the analogy is, but like we need to look at things from, an additional perspective, that business perspective, and learning that sort of language of the business allows us to, if nothing else, show up in the conversations where we can finally have the impact that we need to have, to pursue the, organization's mission in a, faster, more effective way that still kind of corresponds to our values. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. But again, there's like so much opportunity in it. I kind of picture, and this is not just because you were raised in a beach town, but I just picture like, okay, fine, the waves are getting bigger and the waves are coming faster. So then we have to like ride those waves. We have to be equipped to like ride those waves. Otherwise, we're just going to be kind of sitting on the surfboard, and all the action is going to be happening kind of closer to shore. Like we have to be able to swim toward those waves. And in times of a lot of change, like it seems like we're having more than ever. I mean, at least over the last 2 years with all this AI stuff, like who knows what that does. Right. We have to be running fast and keeping up with that change, and maybe even getting ahead of it a little bit if the value that we could potentially provide ends up, actually having an impact on the company, on the balance sheet, on the P&L, whatever,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So you've talked about, or you've described yourself as being kind of like obsessed with context and understanding the why behind the why, or the why behind the why behind the why. Like, what is this obsession like come from? Like, what is that kind of rooted in? Is it just your natural curiosity? And what have you seen the impact within organizations being when some of that context is missing, on this sort of, frontline stakeholder, viewpoint?
Yeah. Well, a byproduct of my obsession with context is, much to my husband's chagrin, I tend to tell long stories. It's always like, get to the point. But to me, I'm like, but the context, the background.
You need to see the whole story.
You have to have it to really understand. But I think it probably comes back to my childhood and my dad's storytelling. And another influential person in my life, my best friend's dad was a lawyer, and he was the only person in my town that I knew of that got the New York Times. And when I would have sleepovers at our house, he would cut out, because obviously it was like a real paper, he would cut out an article and give it to us and say, read this article, and interpret it, like write a report about this article, and at dinner we're going to discuss it. And we had better done that work. Like he just did this all the time. So I think both of those figures really kind of challenged me to think about what is underneath the story that I'm hearing, or what is underneath, what is driving a person's actions. And so that's probably where that obsession with context stems from. But I've also just seen it as, as an employee. I know what it feels like when I don't understand why I'm being told to do something, or the business is making XYZ decision. And I think as humans, we naturally want to fill in the gaps. And so, as a leader, as an organization, if you're announcing a new direction or whatever, or a policy change or whatever it is, without context, like people fill in the holes, and a lot of times probably get it wrong. I know I've gotten it wrong.
Sometimes you think the context is clear. It's like, you take it for granted or something,
Absolutely. That's a good point. Like, it's not always like malicious, or also, we're moving fast. And so,
totally.
I don't have time to like explain everything to you. And I get that. And I get that. But I think that that's where trust comes into play. Like when I've, been in like high trust environments, I am much more willing to accept that I don't understand why the decision is being made, because I trust that the decision was made, in a considered way that is, aligned with our values. So it's not that you have to explain everything, but I do think that there's an opportunity for organizations and ethics and compliance teams to fill in some of that context gaps. You were talking about how like the Office of No, like the rate at which you hear that has not declined as fast as, and I agree with you. The other one is like speaking up, like, oh my God, we are still talking about it, and I will still talk about it because it's so important, but it's like we're having the same conversation that we've had for forever. So I think that that's interesting, and that's like a perennial, it's an evergreen challenge, but I bring it up because I think that context is another word for transparency, is really important, particularly in the kind of the pillar of having a speak up culture.
Mm-hmm. Something you said, so I definitely agree with what you're saying. That connection between context and transparency, I don't think I've made that before. I haven't sort of made that connection before. So that's smart. So good job being smart.
Everyone smile.
But you said something before, like when I'm in a high trust environment, I'm more likely to not like have resistance if I don't have all the context. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of interesting. And again, maybe this is like yet another positive externality or opportunity that comes from building that kind of environment. Human beings are all wired with a self-preservation gene or a self-preservation tendency. And we're all wired with this kind of negativity bias where it seems like in the absence of information, we tend to sort of fill in those gaps with like the worst case scenario. You can't find your kids for 2 seconds. You're like, oh my gosh, they're kidnapped and they're really just, in the other aisle looking at Pokemon cards or something. Yeah. Recent trip to Target there, a little reference to the recent Target trip, but like you automatically assume the worst thing. But when you have that sort of high trust environment, the odds of somebody, you just kind of like end up, it's kind of a salve for like that negativity bias sort of in mass or at scale, or at least that potential is there. And if those steps are taken to be transparent and, you've kind of done that pre-work from an organizational perspective or just from a manager's perspective with your team, I think, there's just so much, I'm kind of an econ person and there's so much dead weight loss that comes from the, application of people's negativity bias. There's all these assumptions that people make in the absence of context or transparency, like you said, and that creates headwinds for engagement and for, whatever. There's like a lot of like air that sort of leaks out of the tires as a function of that. And so that pre-work, again, back to the container or back to the intentionality that comes from trying to be transparent and build that high trust environment, it can do a lot to sort of plug some of those holes,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I wonder, there's so much talk, if you looked at a Google, they do those studies on like the occurrence of words, and you can see like a chart of a word and like you see a certain word sort of fall off. I would imagine if we did that on the word context over the last 2 or 3 years, it's probably totally skyrocketed because of all this AI stuff going on and all of this, talk of context windows and making sure that you're providing the right context to the AI chat that you're utilizing.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I wonder if that is also going to have like a positive knock-on effect for us, like interacting human to human, where we now understand like the necessity or the need for context just in our regular interactions. You know what I'm saying? Like if we're always kind of thinking about context and making sure that, the context that we're providing the right context to our AI bot or whatever, I wonder if that's going to kind of have an influence on the rate of sort of context provision, just kind of in general,
Yeah. Oh, wow. That is, I love that. That is really thought provoking because I'm thinking of it like, like the application perhaps in ethics and compliance, if you think about like the codes and policies, and they used to be written in legalese, and they were really ugly and just like chock full of, just Word documents, and kind of where they are today. But the thinking about, so how will that training, like we're training the AI, right? And so, as you said, we have to provide it with the right context, and like the scaffolding in order to make the decisions. So how, if we applied that same mindset like to the actual people that are working in our organizations, how would that change the way that we, draft our policies and roll them out and train people on them, and reinforce through communication, and not that this is novel, like, right, like I think we've already seen that more like employee centric versus CYA, like legal approach. So, but not everywhere, and not always to the degree that those on the receiving end of said training might wish. So that's really interesting. I'm going to think about that. Like
and I think there's also a kind of a corollary to, I've just seen this in myself over the last kind of several, months, whatever, as I've, just spent more time with AI. Like if I'm not clear in a chat about what I'm looking for, then I have a very fast feedback loop, because it spits out the answer, it spits out what I'm looking for like very quickly. And then I can look at it and be like, okay, I can kind of trace back to like, oh, I didn't provide enough context, or I didn't provide enough clarity, or I wasn't clear enough around what I'm actually asking for. And that has sort of translated sort of off the screen into real life for me personally. Like if we're doing a project, I'm really kind of spending more time trying to provide the right, detail, or the right, I'm trying to be more clear on what I'm asking for. So I'm just saying, like, we have this sort of new tool that has a lot of, it's quote unquote intelligent, but it has a lot of opportunity to make us sort of, I think, better leaders and better sort of, people inside organizations because of those sort of quicker feedback loops in terms of how we communicate with this thing, because we're just communicating to other things. Those other things are human beings, of course. But I think there's some connection to it, and it'll be interesting to see how that sort of starts to play out,
Yeah. And you were talking about the feedback loop. It just makes me think about the feedback loops that we have, the opportunities for feedback that we have in our organizations, which again, kind of talking about like last mile, like with leadership, I think the last mile with ethics compliance is that effectiveness piece.
Totally.
Like, is what we're doing effective? Is it having the impact that we want it to have, or we thought that it would have? And so that comes back to the feedback loop, and figuring out how, like, where are those sources of intelligence around the effectiveness or the impact of what we're doing.
Yeah. And how do you unlock them, and how do you sort of like actually influence those things,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I want to kind of talk a little bit about like behavior as a lever. You talk about behavior as like the real lever, the thing that we're really trying to focus on. It's what you just kind of alluded to just now. What do you think that means in practice for someone that's running an ethics and compliance function, particularly maybe for somebody who feels like the wheels are spinning and they're coming to webinars, they're reading, newsletters and things like that. They get what you're talking about, that behavior is the lever, but, they're not able to affect it in the way that they want.
Yeah. I think that so behavior as a lever. So then how do you, like, what are the levers to pull
that lever? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's a number of them. If I were maybe to talk about, and maybe I would have a different list if I thought about this longer. So I'm probably forgetting something that's really important, and you can you can fill it in. But I think that I'm thinking of three primary levers here right now, and one is inspiration and connection. Maybe context, like the why. One is modeling. So what am I seeing in the organization and in my leadership is kind of the most important one, obviously. And then the other is guidance and tools. And, if I think about, we were talking about codes and policies, I've read like hundreds of codes. Like that's kind of been another big part of my work over the years is thinking about codes and assessing codes and helping companies rewrite and redesign and rethink their codes. So there are a lot of codes I see that kind of describe these very great commitments statements, I would call it, or statements of what the company will do. But the gap is, well, what do I do? Like that's fine that this is what the company does. What do I do to protect data privacy? What do I do to ensure a respectful workplace? Totally. What do I do? And so that providing that, I think we need to be explicit in providing that behavioral guidance, those expectations of this is what you do, this is how you behave. And in the same way that we can't have like a rule for everything, and you can't have you can't outline like here's your like workflow for like every employee for like every kind of risk area that we want to protect against. That's where like it comes back to that connection and modeling. So do I understand as an employee the principles on which like we say that we operate, our values, right, like whatever kind of word you want to use. Do I see that actually happening? So is leadership being explicit around it? Like, are they telling those stories? Like storytelling, such a powerful tool. Are they explaining to me kind of how these values or principles are showing up in the way that the choices that we're making as a business? Am I seeing that reflected in my manager, in performance management? Like that, I think that is such a huge like piece of all of this. Like if we want to, incentivize the right behaviors, how do they show up in our performance management? Do we actually care about it? People are paid.
Totally.
So anyway, I guess to that ethics compliance leader that's not like seeing the wheels turn. I would think on those levels, like how can we explain the connection to our employees? How can we provide them with the guidance and the tools that they need to do the right thing every day? Because 99% of people want to do the right thing, and sometimes they just don't know how, or they don't know what that is.
Yeah, right.
How can we have leadership reinforce that? And then, how do we bake that into our formal and informal kind of mechanisms around how we reward?
Just call it incentives, whether it's pay, whether it's annual review, whether it's an acknowledgement in a group or individually. Those are all sort of, those are all currencies. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I like that model. I mean, you said it, I think you said it was connection, it was modeling, and then it was like guides or something. What was it? What was the last one?
Like guidance,
instructions and guides. Yeah. Guidance and tools. What happens, I think, in a lot of a lot of codes of conduct is that a lot of time is spent on it, kind of to your point, and they're like, okay, cool. Now people know, great. Now we can change the behavior. But in the absence of the specificity in that, I mean, the code is really a guide, right? So like, if there's not that specificity, then the guide is not working. And then people don't know, you're not even planting the seeds for like what behavior should be modeled. So then there's not that sort of like that second category that you talked about, the modeling. Like we have to plant those seeds. Like if I'm telling my children that they should say please and thank you to a server at a restaurant, they should also see me say please and thank you to a server, right? Yeah. Like I didn't plant those seeds, and then they need to see that sort of modeled. And then that connection piece is also sometimes, because it's more amorphous or ephemeral or something, like it's harder to sort of like it's hard to do at scale, that connection piece. Then this policy comes out and it just sort of or this code of conduct comes out and it just totally kind of falls flat because none of those buckets are even really kind of affected. None of those sort of levers end up changing the lever, and it's this sort of false sense of security or something. Yeah.
I listened to the Ethicast that you did yesterday with Ellen, and you were talking about like your the reporting data and like investigation data that you just recently published a report. And one of the things that you mentioned was, you were talking about how many people go to their manager, and you raised like managers don't always know kind of how to handle that situation or ask the right questions. And so I think you were talking about how like the investigation time like can be longer for managers because it takes more time to kind of like get the right information that you need because managers aren't trained. But I reflected on that. I agree, and it's like managers are so important as like a as a tone setter in any organization. Like that's the kind of like that's the biggest unlock. And I think too few, like we all know that, but too few organizations invest the time and resources in equipping their managers, training their managers on being those ethical role models, those culture carriers. And I think, just as the example around like, does a manager know what to do when an employee comes to them with a concern? Are they going to react in a way that will, create a virtuous cycle of, oh, I feel heard, and my trust barometer with you has gone up, and like, yes, I'm going to, whatever it is, or a vicious cycle of like, you've really shut me down. I'm never speaking up again. Not even just about misconduct, but like even my good ideas for how we can, be more efficient in our process or whatever it is.
Yeah. It's like we like promote people and, maybe, I kind of probably do this with my kids where like they get to a certain age and I'm like, well, you should know this. And it's like, well, they don't know it because they're just the first time doing it. It's like, we sort of assume that once someone's title changes or something, then they've just sort of like magically, like the fairy godmother just, hits, like on Cinderella when she hit her with the wand and then her whole dress changes. Here's your new title, bing. Now kind of how to handle all these different situations. And, people really don't. And I think it's easy to take that for granted that you're like, well, you're a manager. You should know how to do this. You're an executive. You should know how to do it. Yeah. It's such a lost opportunity. And I think probably even in my own organization, I probably have blind spots for that as well. But addressing those things and, elevating those people and giving them the tools, to your point, 99% of people are not like power hungry psychopaths. They're trying to do the right thing. They just, and most of the errors in a company are not laziness or like something nefarious. Like you were saying before, it's, a drop ball or it's it's a forced error. Or it's, it's somebody who does, it's coming from a place of ignorance instead of like malfeasance or something,
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, on this question, I want to kind of circle back to like incentives and accountability and this sort of performance management piece. I think like one of the hardest questions that you raised is how to like meaningfully, like how do we integrate ethics into performance management? Like one, why do you think let's just start there. Like, why do you think that is so challenging? Do you think you tell me.
I think that it's, what I hear consistently, and it's real, is if we want to evaluate people on like living our values or being ethical, it's hard to do that in a meaningful way because on one hand you would say, well, if someone isn't living our values or behaving ethically, then they shouldn't even be here. Like we should have already kind of parted ways with them. And so then you don't, as a manager, doing like filling out the performance review, you kind of go the opposite where you're like, yes, and it becomes a check the box. Everyone lives the values, everyone behaves ethically.
Good. So, that's actually a really good point.
Yeah, it is. So it's like, it's hard, but so I like it, in a similar way that I kind of am collecting how people change their titles. I'm also collecting how organizations are integrating ethics, compliance, ethical behavior into performance management in a meaningful way. So I always like send me your examples. But I've seen organizations. I think where I've seen it work really well tends to be more at the level of those like within leadership. I do think you can incorporate it. You can and should incorporate it into kind of like the performance evaluation that everybody receives, and we can talk about that. But where I've seen it like really have impact is like having an ethics check at every promotion kind of decision point, where there's a conversation between like the hiring manager or the whoever, not the hiring manager, but the
promoting manager, whatever, yeah.
like whoever, HR, ethics, compliance, to say like because what I find is like the data isn't always like we're not always speaking to each other.
Totally.
And, I worked with this one organization, and like within a week, I was working with two different organizations, and it just like was coincidental that I talked to both of them within a week. And one had this example of a manager that was promoted from one of their as part of their promotion, they got to change countries and come to the US and be a manager here. And it like they only found out years like later when this person like did something wrong that actually they had like a whole rap sheet. But
in the other country, yeah.
Like in the business, like didn't know it because I think like there's confidentiality, whatever, but we're also like not talking to each other. And so that was really unfortunate because then everybody sees this person who had all these like substantiated cases against this individual get promoted and kind of get this like golden ticket visa situation. And then I talked to another organization that has that communication, that cross point for promotions, and where they were able to spot something and like halt the promotion. And so having those ethics checks or whatever you want to call it, as part of that kind of people management process, I think is one really effective way of ensuring accountability for ethical conduct. And we should also tell people, like, we should be explicit, right? Like,
totally. It's not just how much you sell to get the promotion. It's also this other sort of softer thing. Well, because that, in that first example, like think of the implicit message that sends to the organization. Totally. There's all this effort from this team, this compliance team or this ethics team trying to push these values and, hey, these values are real and blah, blah, blah. And at least locally, you see this guy who's like a substantiated bad actor multiple times, multiple strikes on the rap sheet, get promoted. I mean, it's like, okay, well, I need to not listen to that at all. Maybe not even anything that these folks have to say or anything in this kind of category because they put their money where their mouth is. They demonstrate what actually matters, and what matters is not these things, seemingly at all. Right. It just sends like a very big message that creates such a headwind for, the advancement of that, true values culture that, presumably somebody was trying to drive, Yeah,
absolutely. Really like talk about like erosion of trust and goodwill. So I think that's one point. I've seen a lot of companies include kind of different ethics or in compliance criteria as a percentage of like bonus allocate, bonus potential. So is your team completing their ethics training on time? If you do like an ethical culture survey, like your scores, are they they have to like be above a whatever it is, or the number of complaints that have been made, like within your, not necessarily against like you, but like within your team, and are they substantiated? Like looking at kind of those metrics, turnover, like are you like an outlier here when it comes to kind of what would be considered like a normal turnover for whatever like kind of industry or department like you're in. So having different criteria and not that it's like all or nothing, but like a percentage of your bonus potential is another mechanism that I've seen organizations do. And then, when it comes to like kind of performance management for everybody, rather than like, do they live the values? It's like, how do they live the values?
Right.
And, at
least get some anecdotes, at least get some data points to validate the yes or no question, to your point.
Right. Yeah. And like, what, have they like really done something like exemplary? And so, okay, that's a 5. But a 3 is fully meeting expectations. So a 3 is not bad either. Like, so that the how, rather than just like the check the box, like, do they live the values?
Yeah, I think that's good. And that's not really that hard of a sell, I don't think, to, inject a couple of questions like that into the performance reviews. You know what I'm saying? I think a lot of, as we've done webinars on this kind of topic, this incentives topic, and there's always sort of some questions in the chat to say, well, I can't control the budget and I can't control the bonus and stuff like that. And it's like, incentive is not just dollars. Like the currency for an incentive is not just dollars. It can be recognition. It can be acknowledgement. There's a bunch of different things that, there's a bunch of little levers you can pull in that sort of incentive, underneath that incentives umbrella that, are not just, I need more budget, which always seems to be the perennial, objection that people seem to have on like why they can't sort of, effectuate this kind of, tangible application of values in this context. So I always like to wrap up with this question. I had a bunch more questions that we didn't even get to because this conversation was so interesting. But if you could go back in time and find a young Emily, what's a piece of advice you wish you could give her?
I wanted to say touch grass. I think it really took becoming a parent to realize, not to realize what matters, but to recalibrate what matters. And this is maybe a little contradictory to like the passion that I was describing earlier for like why I do what I do and what we do. But like, it's very important, and also life matters. And so kind of having a better balance around life, I think is a piece of advice that I would have given younger Emily. Like, I'm not curing cancer, but I do support organizations where that is their work. So like, it's meaningful, but like, I'm not curing cancer. And so, like, take a break, touch grass, experience the world. I think that it makes you like a more effective employee. Right. We got to like recharge ourselves and protect our peace. Touch grass.
Love it. Very good. Thank you so much, Emily. This was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed having you on the show. Thanks so much.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. It was fun.